Okay, let me know when you hit the button.
Okay, ready.
Okay. Afternoon, folks. My name is Kerry Hatch. I am the Interim Senior Associate Provost for Academic Services, and I am joined here in the SUNY System office, or in one of the offices, with my colleagues, Cindy Proctor and Elise Pluzio. We're here today to talk about the SUNY Open Access Policy. We're going to review where we are. We're going to talk about some things that we'd like to get your feedback on. We hope to make the end of this process relatively interactive if possible. So, Michaela, I'm going to be relying on you to kind of help coordinate that end activity when we start to try and get some feedback from our participants.
Okay.
Okay, so, basic question, what is open access? So generally, it's free and unrestricted online access to scholarly and creative works. What we're really trying to do with open access is make the content that's created by our faculty, students, and staff throughout the university more easily available for research activities and for instructional purposes. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, give you some folks basic background on what open access is, and then we're going to dive a bit into the policy. So this is kind of why we're doing open access. One of my colleagues in the system office said, you better be able to explain this, because when I look at this slide, I don't understand what it means. And what it really does is it tries to show you in a fairly simple way what the current situation is with scholarly publishing, the impact that it has, and why the model doesn't work any longer. So generally, if you're a faculty member at a university, you're being paid by that university. You might be getting some grant money to do research. The result of that research is basically data or articles or things like that, which you then give to publishers to place in journals that they then sell back to libraries and individuals. And that paywall that gets created as part of that process becomes a barrier for people to access information. I don't think I have to tell folks that are probably involved in this webinar that library budgets aren't what they used to be. The cost of scholarly works, journals and journal publications keep rising at astronomical rates. Publishers make very high profit margins, and the model just doesn't work any longer for either the researchers who are publishing, for the libraries that have to buy the content, or the consumers of the information. So we're really looking to think differently about how we do this. So some of the benefits of going into an open access model where we make our content more freely available is we basically see increased visibility of the articles, increased citation rates because the content is more freely available, more innovation because people have access to more information that has gone through a peer review process, increased global impact, and better public good coming out of that access and compliance with funder policies. Increasingly, we're seeing funding agencies saying that the work of the funded activity must be made freely available. So that's part of what open access addresses. Open access isn't new within SUNY. We've actually been working on it for decades now. Kind of interesting that I can go back and I can find presentations I gave 20 years ago to the Faculty Senate and others about open access. So it's not something that's new. It actually, what's really kind of interesting, it also aligns very closely with our activities of regarding open educational resources. OER, that's more on the instructional side, where we've actually received significant funding from the state to work on migrating faculty content, or faculty from using high-cost textbooks to using open education resources that come at a much lower cost to the student. And because of our activities in that space and the funding that has been given to us by the state, we're actually now being seen as a national leader in the OER movement. And we do think that there are ways that we can make some very good connections between what we do in OER and what we need to do in open access. Back in 2015, the University Faculty Senate, through the Operations Committee, requested a study to advance open access within SUNY. In 2015, the SUNY Library Directors, now known as the SUNY Library Consortia, included open access in the 2015 to 2020 strategic plan. And in April of last year, the UFS passed a resolution asking the SUNY system administration to adopt a policy on open access and associated digital repositories, where we can store those open access content. So we've got a lot of things that are going on. Additionally, the Stony Brook University, Stony Brook University, SSBU, adopted a resolution through their faculty senate last February on open access. So we've got quite a bit going on in that space. And this just kind of shows you where we've got a pretty good infrastructure for digital repositories to support open access. The left-hand part of this slide shows you campuses that are using a product called Digital Commons. So Binghamton University, New York State College at Buffalo, Stony Brook, Cortland, ESF, Brockport, Albany, and Buffalo Law School all use Digital Commons. The UBIR repository, which is listed on the bottom, is the University of Buffalo's repository that is using a product or an open source tool called DSpace. And on the right-hand side, the SUNY Digital Repository is run out of the Office of Library and Information Services here at System Administration and provides repository services to campuses that would like to avail themselves of that. That also uses DSpace. Additionally, we are in the process of the implementation of a new library services platform, which may come into play in this space as well. So after we received the request from the University Faculty Senate about asking us to put together an open access policy on open access and repositories, we formed a steering committee. That steering committee included representatives from the Distinguished Academy, the University Faculty Senate, the Faculty Council of Community College, students, librarians, vice presidents for research, and provosts. So to give you some names, Don Neiman from SUNY Binghamton was our provost representative. Constantia Constanau, who is the Dean and Director of Libraries at Stony Brook, was one of our distinguished faculty members. She is one of the distinguished librarians within the system, and she is also the director at Stony Brook. The VPRs were represented by Jim Diaz at SUNY Albany. Library directors were represented by Austin Booth from the University of Buffalo. The University Faculty Senate was represented by Jerry Zahavi at the University of Albany, Meg Shettle from Stony Brook University, and Gwen Kay also sat in on those conversations. Faculty Community College was represented, Faculty Council of Community College was represented by David Van Arsdale. The student representative was Stephen Murphy, and we had a distinguished professor, Dr. Richard Rosenfeld from SUNY Downstate Medical Center. So it was actually a very good group. We worked through the summer with that group, and basically we came up with a draft access policy to put in front of the Board of Trustees that would call for campus-level policies. We had a lot of conversation about whether or not we would come up with a single policy for the university or whether we would defer to the individual campuses, and we all weighed heavily on the side of deferring to the individual campuses, knowing the great cultural differences that exist across our campuses, and really understanding that the way that the policy would have the highest impact would be if the conversation happened at the local level. So we really put the focus on, making sure that the campuses were the ones that were working on their individual policies. Our policy was focused on highlighting best practices for consideration as part of that process. So our draft policy had each campus we told each campus to collaboratively develop an open access policy with respect and protection for faculty ownership. A lot of conversations about faculty ownership in the committee. We also talked about flexibility for faculty in choosing the terms of use. As we get deeper into some conversations over the course of the next year, hopefully people will become more familiar with terms of use that can be associated with open access. But we want to give faculty as much choice as possible in this space. We also wanted to make sure that we have repositories that are accessible and searchable. We have a good foundation to build on, but we did want to make sure that we were paying attention to that as part of what we are asking the campuses to do. We also wanted to make sure that we were consistent with our SUNY patents and invention and copyright policy, because that is something we all live by currently. So whatever we do has to be consistent with that. And we also made provisions for the system provost office and the SUNY library community to ensure that we had access to repository services and related technologies to make it all work together. So once we got the draft together, we shared it out with the university community for a 4-week comment period. Took comments back. We also took comments from the Board of Trustees. So we felt like we got pretty good feedback, and we made the appropriate adjustments. So some of the changes that were made were the draft referred to scholarship and creative works of faculty and students. It now reads faculty, students, and staff. And that actually came up at the request of Trustee Stoller, who was asking about, well, where do our research fellows fit in? Where do the medical residents fit in? Things like that. And those are actually, we found out those are actually employees. So they didn't necessarily fall into the category of faculty, students, or faculty and students. So we did add staff, and we feel like that really covers pretty much everybody. We added a specific provision requiring the cataloging of materials in the open access repository, and we reiterated the university's desire for faculty, students, and staff to publish in leading journals. There was a fear we got based on the feedback that faculty members felt like we were asking them to step away from that kind of traditional model, and that is not at all what we were talking about doing. We still strongly encourage our faculty, students, and staff to publish in leading journals across the world. We added language on open access provisions for most journals. Most journals do allow faculty or researchers to self-archive their materials in open access repositories. We just wanted to make people aware of that as well. We did add provisions for system-provided training around ownership rights, and we do think that that's another nice alignment. That's where we can really get some good alignment with the OER activity that we have. We made clear that the development process at every campus would include faculty governance. And again, we made it clear that respect for and protection of faculty and student staff ownership is a priority. So the owners decide voluntarily whether or not to have something included in the open access repository. This is not a forced march. So the charge to the campus, I'm not going to read this to you. You can read it yourself, but I think it kind of, what we're doing is basically instructing each state-operated campus to work through their particular processes on campus to create an open access policy and have that policy in place no later than March 31st, 2020. We also strongly encourage that community colleges do the same, although because of the authority or lack of authority that we have over community colleges, we cannot require them to do it. We can only encourage and support them in doing that work. Some of the best practices that we are saying campuses need to include in their campus policy is, again, respect for and protection of ownership, that voluntary commitment to determine when to share and how to share, information, resources, and training relative to the ownership, and we can talk about that in a little bit. And again, making sure that we're consistent with Article 11, Title J, Patents, Inventions, and Copyright Policy. So making sure everything stays in alignment there. Again, flexibility for the creators and whether it can be used for non-commercial, commercial, or non-commercial, copy, edited, remixed, and built upon. Again, we want to make sure that that right belongs to the creator. Cataloging materials, facilitating user recognition of types of information to be housed. And I think that's one that the library community will have to start to take a look at in terms of metadata and standards for metadata around our open access repositories. And the issuance of an addendum for each article work that authors can provide to publishers, notifying them of the open access policy. And we're actually having a conversation about that here in the system office about what our legal counsel can do in that regard. So the charge to the system office is for the system provost to work with the campus chief academic officers and SUNY librarians and others to ensure that every faculty member and student has access to open access scholarly repositories, and where appropriate related shared network services so that these SUNY repositories can be integrated and searchable via a single interface. And again, we have some work already started in that particular area. So what we'd like to do now is just ask for some feedback from the participants about what it is that we can do to ensure progress and next steps. What can we do to support campuses in this effort? One of the things we have talked about and we are actually required to do is look at professional development for faculty, staff, and students on copyright and Creative Commons licensing. And most of what our repositories apply to content that gets created or stored in our repositories, it applies some form of Creative Commons licensing to that content. And we need to make sure that people who are submitting their materials understand what that Creative Commons licensing means. So we are talking about, professional development activities in that area. Probably professional development just in open education. What does it mean for open access? How does it align with open education resources? Increasingly, if you're getting federal grant dollars, you're probably being asked to also make your data available, not just your journal articles. So there's questions about open data, open science, things like that. We are also looking at identifying partners, working to create pathways for campuses to work with partners. Two that we've already identified are Spark, which is an organization out of the American Research Libraries who focus on open access and also open education resources. Creative Commons is another organization that we've already talked about. One of the things that we discussed yesterday, and we'd like some feedback on, would it be helpful for campuses if we crafted a model project plan that we could then give to campuses who would modify it to their local needs? So what we could do is, identify the sponsors, the appropriate stakeholders, the teams that probably need to be created, the associated tasks and the draft timeline, and we can work with the campus to help modify that. So that's a service that we could provide. Would like your input on that. We are already in the process, and this is I mean the Office of Library and Information Services out of the SUNY Provost Office. We're in the process of putting out a request for information on products that support research workflow. A repository is part of a research workflow. It's one single piece of it. There are a lot of other pieces. This whole concept of research workflow is relatively new, and we want to get ahead of the game by basically polling the commercial environment and saying, what is it that commercial products are out there? What are they doing? What do the commercial providers of these kind of activities think the future looks like? So again, we can loop campus folks in on that, and we will definitely do that. We also have Workplace, which is our SUNY version of Facebook. If you were on earlier, you heard Michaela talk about, should we put the video of this webinar in Workplace? We don't have a group for open access yet. We probably could. We can very easily create one. We can also spin up a community of practice where campus participants who are working on their individual campus policies can easily engage in communication with others from other campuses to find out what's working, what's not working, share best practices, share obstacles that have been, avoided. So just like to hear some feedback from folks on that. Michaela, I don't know if you want to do that via chat, if you want to do it via, how you might want to manage that.
All right, well, I have a couple of things in chat. We have some questions, and then also down at the bottom, if you click Q&A, there is also a question.
So Casey asks, we're not asking our researchers to step away from the traditional model. What incentives can we use to encourage them to take this additional step? How would open access contribute to tenure and promotion? That's always the big question, yeah. And actually that probably is something the promotion and tenure piece is something we haven't dug into yet, but that's where the rubber hits the road. We all know that. Probably best to start to work on that once we get the campus policies in place, because I think that'll clear the path for those promotion and tenure discussions. So I don't have a good answer for those. I just know that these are the perennial questions that come up around open access. You know, what incentives do we have? What can we do to make it, you know, to make it become part of the lifeblood of the university? And I think that's part of the path we have to go down, you know, starting now with the policy in place, and as the campuses start to put their own campus policies in place. And it could, again, it's probably going to be one of those things that's going to vary campus to campus, department to department. You know, so it's kind of hard to sit here at the system office in Albany and say, yeah, this is the way we think it's going to play out. What is interesting, I do think this is a space where we can get some cooperation from UUP. UUP, we've been in active discussions with UUP about, you know, the kind of things that we can work on together. And I do think this is when we actually had some activity with them before, and when I think we could could continue to work with them on, because I do think it is something that they understand and will assist us with. So Casey, I know that's not a great answer, but it's the best I've got right now.
So then over in chat, can you see those?
Yeah, I'm trying to change my.
Okay, I can read them.
I got it. Hang on.
Okay.
All right. Should I start at the beginning?
Yep. Oh.
Can you hear me? Okay, can you say more about the cataloging of materials where the DOIs provided? Brockport just passed their open access policy last week. Congratulations, Brockport. You're here. We actually started to have a conversation about DOIs last week when we were in, when we were having our meeting of the SUNY Library Consortium. And we do think there are some things we can do there. It is not something we're doing at this point in time, but you know, this is exactly the kind of conversation that we need to have. And you know, it's digital object identifiers. For those that don't know, it's a way for us to tag these materials. But again, these are things that we haven't got our head around yet, but the conversation's starting, which is a good thing. And again, congratulations to Brockport. It's pretty impressive. And Danielle, so you think there would a model project plan would be helpful? And you know, if anybody wants to help volunteer creating that, I mean, we've got pretty good staff here that can craft a model plan, but we really don't know enough about how things work on a campus when it comes to policy development. So we will need some campus perspective on that. Okay, John thinks a project plan is also good. Can we see chat activity? Not sure what that means. SUNY Broom, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So on that, just make sure that you have it set to all panelists, and then you should see everyone's questions.
Just out of curiosity, do folks think the workplace group for open access would be something of interest? Okay, thank you, Jenny. All right. Good. Does anybody else have any other ideas what we could do from the system office to make system-wide PD is also needed? Absolutely, yeah. And we'll be leveraging the Center for Professional Development to help with that. Anything else? I mean, if folks have ideas or thoughts about what it is that we can do from a system perspective, we'd appreciate hearing that. We do think that this is one that this is a policy that we can. It's not. We don't think it's going to be a terribly heavy lift for the campuses on the policy end, or even on the repository end. I think we've got a lot of the pieces in place for that. I think what's going to be the more difficult thing is what we always struggle with in this kind of activity is the long-term change management associated to make this really successful. And that gets back to the points that were made before about promotion and tenure. and you know, engagement of faculty, culture change. Exactly, Kim. Yeah, you know, so, and that's where we're hoping to engage the University Faculty Senate on an ongoing basis about this. We'd like to learn more about from the folks on the campuses about the campus governance groups and how the system can help campuses work within the context of the campus governance groups, because we know that that's where it's going to play out on the campus side. So I think it's going to be continued communication, and we will be, my colleagues here in the system office and I will be getting together over the next couple of weeks to follow up on the professional development pieces here, the model project plans, and an ongoing communication plan associated with this, because, you know, what we don't want to do is have the conversation drop. This is one that, again, this really gets into culture change. It's change management, so we're going to need continual conversations. And Danielle is saying that OER leads have biweekly meetings, maybe have biweekly or monthly Zoom meeting with personnel responsible for OA on their campuses. That's a great idea. Yeah, we could create a cohort of people who are leading the efforts on their campuses and have those folks get together on a Zoom meeting periodically just to touch base. I think that's a great idea. Is there a desire for campuses to end up on a shared platform? Casey, no. You know, I think the reality of that happening is probably pretty vague, and we do think that there's ways that we can easily lay a front end over top of our individual campus repositories and make them searchable. And again, that's something we'll be looking at with an RFI. Long term, we know the technology environment underpinning all of it will evolve and change. Short term, we're not going to be asking campuses to shift from one repository to another, change their practices. What we do hope we can do is maybe leverage some of the work, you know, from some of our larger institutions, maybe do some shared services so that every campus doesn't have to do it all on their own. So we'll be looking at that. Is there a project timeline for when some of these next steps might be available to campuses? No, there is not at this point in time, but I will, let me commit to basically having a follow-up webinar within 6 weeks. Does that make, that?
And also, I would just chime in that I think one of the things we had discussed as a goal for today is to hear more from the campuses as to who you know your relevant stakeholders to be, so that we can build that into the timeline that the system is pulling together, the project plan, so to speak.
So, folks, who would be your stakeholders on campuses? And you can type that into the chat. Faculty, faculty, faculty. What about research vice presidents? Where do they sit now? I mean, the pecking order, I'd assume they're more at the university centers. Digital humanities. Legal counsel.
Counsel, yeah.
Okay.
And Carrie, I will save the chat so that you have this later.
Thank you, Michaela. Appreciate it. Okay. All science centers also have VPRs, VPs of research. Okay. Thank you, Paul. You know, interesting. This has given us good things to kind of put our heads around. Okay. Well, let's move on to the next. I think I only have one slide left. which I think is probably just questions. Yep. So, is there anything else anybody wants to bring up? Marketing, marketing is actually going to be got to be a big push on this, right? And my assumption is marketing means marketing to our own faculty and staff and others. Real quickly, can I ask my colleague at Brockport who mentioned the open access policy to kind of quickly document how that was put in place? Was that run through? In addition to copyright and open license, there needs to be faculty education about publishing agreements and negotiation. That's really a good point, Jenny. Yeah. Yes, this will be. This is being recorded and archived. You'll be able to find it. Just Google SUNY Open Access. It'll take you to a page on the Provost site, and there'll be a link to the recording there. We also have a website that a group of our librarians put together for Open Access Week in 2016 that we're going to ask them to update and revamp so it is in better alignment and support of the policy, so it'll be there as a resource as well.
It's a commons.edu website.
It's got it, yeah. We've got to get a new address for it. We have time left. We started about a year ago. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Kim.
Did they have a chance to look at the SUNY policy if they were going through that process?
You can ask.
Did you have a chance to look at the SUNY policy as you were going through that process? It sounds like they were kind of happening at the same time.
Well, if no one has any other questions, I guess we can sign off. If you do, you can continue to pop in the chat. Those of us at the system office will be here for a few more minutes. Yeah, so the Brockport one was done before the SUNY policy took place. So I actually have two in place already. We're ahead of the game. And we hope to, thanks, Paul. Appreciate that feedback. And we'll be getting, like I said, we'll be getting back. I'll make a commitment to have something again in about 6 weeks to review where we think we are, maybe a draft of the project plan, get some feedback on. Mary Jo, no, there is no funding. So, this is what we'll make it work as best we can. And I think what we need to do is just continue to think about how, as we evolve, we align our investments to support these policies. So as we're looking at the new library services platform, as we look at that RFI for the research workflow, and we think about how we begin to move forward to support future initiatives, we might end up having to take funding from existing supports that are provided to older initiatives and start to align them with newer initiatives. So I think it's just a matter of, there is no new money, but there's always ways to move money around. The reality is you might have to give up some things to make the newer things happen. So those are the conversations we need to continue to have over the next couple of years. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Cataloging.
I'm sorry? There's okay, could you talk a little bit more about the cataloging aspect? I think that's something we've talked a lot about, should we standardize some of our metadata aspects in our repositories, but we've never done it. We've talked about it. So it's really something I think we need to circle back on and talk about with the appropriate groups. And if we do want to look at our metadata standards and our repositories, what should they be? Metadata, of course, our favorite topic.
Yeah.
Metadata drives a lot, you know, and that will be very interesting because as we look to, again, the future and thinking about what it is that we could leverage, we know we can leverage metadata, and actually as we have a significant cohort of people, especially on the Board of Trustees, who are really interested in artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is fed by things like metadata. And we know we could do some very interesting things with good metadata out of our repositories. We just have to have that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that the trustees were interested in is, you know, the difference between, is it a conference proceeding? Is it a draft of something submitted to a journal? Is it a copy of a final document that was in a journal? Just so that users will be able to identify, you know, what it is and its source. So those are some of the things we're thinking about when we think about standardizing metadata. And thank you so much. Several people have volunteered to help, so that's great. We will be calling on you to look at some drafts of things and as we go forward.
Yep. Yeah, Carrie, we're having conversations about should we be pointing people to OA policies that are out there. Certainly there are a ton of them out there, and we can do that. That's actually part of what we'll probably be building up in the websites, things like that. So look to hear from us again, and we'll follow the same communication protocol, a broad blast to folks, you know, about our next webinar sometime within the next 6 weeks. So anybody who's on my staff and knows that I am saying this, be prepared to work with us on that. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.